it feels like it's a teenage characters, but it's really targeting like 13-year-olds versus some YA, which are like 13-year-olds to 18-year-olds. And also, we know a huge portion of you are 30-year-old, 40-year-old women reading this and wishing there was more smut. And that's how Sarah J. Maas came into existence. This book isn't...
I'm sorry, that's really funny.
Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. It is I, your host, Maria, with one of my handsome bitches today.
I think we should go back to ruggedly handsome. If Katie's not here, I'll be ruggedly handsome, Will.
And with my ruggedly handsome co-host, Will. Hello.
This week, what we're doing is we're continuing our adventures into Authortube. So, before this, we had read The Savior's Champion, which was horrific, and The Cyborg Tinkerer, which was horrific and had a bunch of explicit content that was painful to get through. And today we are doing Keeper by Kim Chance. Now, I didn't realize this till we started reading, but she deleted her channel like 2 years ago, so she's more of like an ex-author-tuber.
So I went to her website. She hosts her videos on a different platform now.
Oh, okay.
She archived them all on YouTube, and then they're being hosted on a different... and if you are subscribed to her newsletter, you get access to the videos. She also does editing work. Like, people can send... Like, she'll do a full manuscript.
This was actually a traditionally published book, too, which is a little different than the other Authortube books we've done, which were all self-published. So if you had to rank this among our other Authortube authors...
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. It's not good. It's not great. It's fine. It absolutely has things that need to be worked on, but it was by far... the beginning was a little hard to get through until I did a mental thing that like made me... I was expecting this book initially to be something else, which made the beginning very hard to get through. And I will argue that the beginning just is hard to get through, but it is hands down way more competently written than the other. This book's crime is... It is kind of boring for the first 3/4, and there are some character choices and stuff we'll discuss.
This is one of the most boring books I've ever read, and it's still better than the Savior series and the Cyborg Tinkerer by a lot.
By a lot. Like, it's here. The others are, like, here.
Those are, like, actively smacking you in the face, whereas this is just super boring, and the structure of it is really poor. By the way, if you would like to suggest any Authortube books for us to read, we're going to continue this series because I like to see Maria suffer. Leave them in the comments below.
And these are the videos that get us the most views.
Yeah. I think because they have a built-in audience.
No, just people like watching people dislike books.
Yeah, it's true. I have other books, but no, we're not reading A Court of Thorns and Roses. If I'm feeling very ungenerous, we may read Ember in the Ashes at some point, because that looks like a trash fire that everyone loves.
Sarah J. Maas is just, I feel like at this point, and mainly just because she's been so well covered, low-hanging fruit.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, there's so many good people ripping her books apart.
We had a commenter the other day who had obviously watched our Savior's videos, and I think our Cyborg Tinkerer, and was like, do these people like any books? And like, would you like to see the 6-episode series we did on Hyperion? Or hey, have you looked at our Axiom End or our Novik videos or like Kushiel? Like, there are so many books we've liked.
So that's the thing, is we do actually like quite a lot of books. These are really just an exploration of Authortube and to see how their advice stacks up against their books. Anyway, on to the book itself, though. What is this book about, Maria?
The basic premise is... Girl from our world, living totally normal life, discovers she has magic powers and is being visited by a ghost lady from the past. Plot ensues. And by plot, I mean not a lot of plot happens until the last fourth of the book, but things ensue. This book was just... So I started reading this, and it was super cringe. And number one, this author does this thing, especially, like, the first chapter is kind of painful to get through, because she has characters in it that just spout nerd culture facts, like an episode of The Big Bang Theory. And what I mean by that is The Big Bang Theory, they would just drop random, like name dropping, but with nerd facts. It didn't actually impact the plot or tie into the plot. And I'm going to use the difference between how Stranger Things uses D&D. Like, references versus how Big Bang uses general nerd references. Big Bang's general nerd references are really, and if you love Big Bang, that's fine. So did my mom's.
No, it's not fine. You're a bad person, and please unsubscribe.
Don't listen to Will. Stay subscribed. Join our Patreon. But when the Big Bang Theory uses pop culture and nerd references, it's for laughs, and it's just really surface level, and it like connects to what is happening, but it's not actually, it's no deeper than that moment. Like once that thing is said, it ends. And there's only one reference that in this book that I thought actually was a good one for the plot and the characters, and it's the only one that gets mentioned more than once.
The other thing is that it's very surface level, not just in terms of how it affects the plot, but in terms of what sci-fi they're talking about. In this one, they're talking about 3 or 4 comic books and Star Wars, and that's it. Like in the Big Bang Theory, they don't have references to like the Foundation series or anything by Asimov or Hyperion or like the Wheel of Time. They just have like the same rotation of the most known pulp culture.
Now, I will say, I'll forgive this book because the character who does this the most is specifically a comic book nerd. And so it's a lot of DC and Marvel references.
I don't forget and I don't forgive. I think the author thinks it's endearing and it's not.
And especially in the first chapter, it's real hard to get through. Now, a good example of using a nerd reference or cultural, and I'm using nerdy in the sense of like commonly used nomenclature, is in Stranger Things. The core group of characters play D&D, and they use D&D to understand the weird phenomenon that is happening to them. It's their frame of reference for all the weird shit that is happening to them, and it is the thing that they regularly go back to. So like in season 1, there's the weird monster, they name it the Demogorgon, they call it the Demogorgon forever. And because they're all big D&D nerds, they have a lot of understanding of these different like concepts. So in season 4, there's Vecna, who is Dark Wizard of the Underlord, who curses people, and they're dealing with this alternate dimension being who is cursing people with psychic powers. And so they use that name as a way to attempt to understand and identify this creature, and it gives a sense of just like modicum of control.
It's their D&D group that's doing all these things. Yes. In terms of that's the link that, well, not just the link, it's a small town, they have a number of friends, but like this is the D&D group dealing with this, and so it actually has some character stuff, which is not this book. Okay, so I was in the car and I realized I was not quite reading fast enough. So I was like, or I hadn't started the book soon enough. So I was in the car with my mom and I didn't have my earphones. So I was like, do you mind if I just put this on the car? And she watches our videos. So Mom, I promise I will make less sex references in this video. I don't promise that at all. She was like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. And first off, she was horrified that I listen at 2.5 speed. But secondly, I cringed so all body cringe because this book it's not bad, but it's cringe and it hurt, especially in that first chapter where the main character will not shut up about the SATs.
I'm going to describe the first chapter and then describe when I realized what this book I think is actually attempting to do, which is not what I went in. I went into this book thinking it was going to be YA that is trying to be like older. Like there's that realm of YA that is trying to be a bit more mature. Like it might not have the most darkest violent concepts, but it's written in a way where it's the teenager in question is really mature for their age, so the way they think is mature for their age.
Or it's an adult, you can tell, narrative voice talking about it, what a teenager
exactly
is doing.
Because it's third person. The way this book opens is our main character Lainey Stiles is at a comic book nerds, like a game shop type of thing, and it is comic book night. And a bunch of people are there. Her friend Maggie begged her to go. She's trying to study for the SAT because it's like a Thursday night and the SAT is on Saturday.
She keeps mentioning words in her head that are big words.
And she's like, I need to learn 50 words by... So let me just tell you something. I used to tutor for SAT and ACT. If you have 50 words to memorize by like in 2 days, it's not going to happen. You're not going to memorize those words. Vocabulary works best in small chunks over a period of time. It's not going to happen. So Lainey, you're already screwed. It's not happening. But she's in this mess. There's a ton of people in costume doing stuff, and she's trying to study, and her friend's flirting with the guy. And we're going to talk about the fact that I am so upset that nothing, because her friend's name is Maggie, and like Maggie's internal life is non-fucking existent. But anyway.
I also, isn't Maggie like brown, if not black, so she falls into that stereotype.
I took that she was African American.
Sassy black best friend.
She might not actually be black, but she's described as brown. We don't get a ton of. That's one thing I will say.
Curly hair, I think they mentioned too.
I have very little actual understanding of what these characters look like, and I don't know if that's because I was listening to it as an audiobook, but it's just like, I know Ty, there's a character named Ty, has blue eyes. They're in this comic book store, and there's all like this guy dressed up as Thor comes up and starts flirting with her in the most pushy, gross way, and he won't take no for an answer, and it's just like why'd you have to start? It was just a really weird tonal decision. And also, like, I've read so many books lately where like men are just portrayed, and like, here's the thing, I've been to conventions, I know that people can be weird and pushy, and I know that men just in general can be pushy AF, but it just like it didn't read as like a genuine interaction. It read a little like, oh, this is what a dick guy dressed up as Thor would be. Like, he literally at one point is like, I'm looking for my, what's her name?
Jane Foster.
I'm looking for my Jane Foster. Is it gonna be you?
And so Lainey decides, all right, I need to reach into my fanfic tropes, pull out fake boyfriend.
Also, here's the thing. She went with her best friend. She's in the situation where this man isn't taking no for an answer. She chooses not to go find her friend Maggie to get out of the situation, but she just, like Will said, pulls fanfic trope out of her pocket, waves it off, and like looks across the room and is like, I need to find someone to get me out of this. She sees a tall,
dark drink of water,
not interacting with everything, and she's like, yes, this random stranger I've never met before. I shall call him Babe and pretend he is my boyfriend, and hopefully he plays along and helps me get out of this situation. And you're like, no, this is painful to read. You're not doing this, Lainey, are you? But she does. She just goes up to this guy and she's like, oh, babe, there you are. I've been looking for you. And he's like, what? And she's like, and so the guy's like, oh, yeah, babe, where you been? And then Thor's like, fuck me, grumbles and goes off, and she like ends up talking to this guy, and his name is Ty. She introduces herself. They have a nice little conversation. She's like, wow, the one thing I will say is this book has what I feel like, for the most part, adequately displays what it's like to like meet a guy, find him kind of cute, he thinks you're kind of cute, like, because it doesn't feel as like Wrath and Dawn soulmates fever touch kind of thing, which it could have been, given like how, like, that's what I expected.
I will say overall, Lainey feels not quite the age she is, but she feels very much like a teenager.
She does.
In terms of her unsteadiness, her anxiety at times, just how reactive she is to certain things, and there is a lot of interiority to the character.
Sometimes I read books and I'm like, I don't believe somebody would make that decision, but for the most part, I believe, like, I get why Lainey makes the decisions she does. I also, like, she makes this one decision later on and she was like, why the fuck did I do that? That was really dumb. And like, yeah, teenagers don't have the best impulse control. Like, yeah, in that moment, I kind of get it. But anyway, so her and Ty have that moment, and then she's like, her friend Maggie comes up, and they're talking, and then the guy disappears. He's gone. And then Maggie's like, oh, I met this guy. He asked me out tonight, but we have to go home so I can help you study. And Lainey's like, no, you go out on that date. You go hang out with that guy who also thinks what's-her-face was Spider-Man's true love instead of Mary Jane. And again, there's just these drop, comic book reference, drop. And so Maggie's like, yay, thank you. And so she's walking out of the comic book store like place. She's going to her car, and she sees in the shadow of an alleyway a woman in an old-timey dress, which she initially mistakes as a cosplay for a character she's not familiar with. Because like Lainey, like, she knows stuff, but she's not super nerdy. Like, she's like book smart, but she's not a huge comic book nerd like Maggie. But anyway, and so she's like, I must just not know that character. But then she realizes the lady's covered in blood, and then the lady like calls her name, ends up touching her. She passes out. She wakes up. It has a panic attack in the car. And it was at this point in the book that I was like, what the fuck am I reading? Like, it's just because
it moved way too fast, I feel like.
It moved because, like, we just, like, it was one of those things where I like to argue that you need a tiny bit of normalcy before you throw the big, like, woohoo, this is what's happening. Will is a little bit more like, the woohoo that's happening happens, like, on page one.
I am like that, and I don't like books to faff about. But in this case, and in certain cases, yeah, it has an uncomfortable limbo of the author is not talented enough to make this impact hit with very little wind up. So there needed to be more wind up for this to feel like it's impactful versus just like, whoa, what's going on? This is wacky.
That's something I'm going to say about like a lot of the emotional beats. I don't think they were led up to. Part of this doesn't help that the way Lainey internally speaks, because it's in first person, is not the most, like, there were times where, like, if she had described something a little bit differently, you could have gotten a little bit more of like a gut reaction out of it. But Lainey, like, and you kind of get the sense that Lainey speaks how Lainey talks, like this is just the way, and that's how her narration goes. But like, that's not always the best way. Like, you guys have noticed, I tell stories sometimes and something very serious, and I'm talking about it like it's a damn comedy. And that's what it's like being in Lainey's head a little bit. And so, like, this moment is happening, and she's like, wow, this is fucking bizarre. What's up with this, guys? And you're like, this should be and then when she does get terrified, there's just this disconnect because it happens, like, very suddenly. But anyway, what I realized a little bit after this point is I was like, what's this tone of this book is not, like, it's not trying to be Savior's Champion, which was trying to be super serious, like, death, killing, competition, it's not trying to be Cyborg Tinkerer, like, let's get fingered in an alleyway in the first 10 pages, But, and yet they both felt very immature. I realized this book isn't trying to be that. It literally is just, it reminded me of four cartoons on Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and 4Kids TV, like the Winx Club, the Witches TV show, and Totally Spies. That and then like Miraculous, for those of you who have been watching Miraculous, where, like, this is it feels like it's a teenage characters, but it's really targeting like 13-year-olds. Like, it's looking at 13-year-olds and going, hi guys, this is for you, versus some YA, which are like 13-year-olds to 18-year-olds. And also, we know a huge portion of you are 30-year-old, 40-year-old women reading this and wishing there was more smut. And that's how Sarah J. Maas came into existence. This book isn't...
I'm sorry, that's really funny. It's totally true. No, you just described the evolution of Sarah J. Maas in her head while she was writing the books.
That's exactly what happens. But anyway, so this book isn't trying to be that. Like, it's not trying to, like, at all. The romance feels like a teenage romance. The friendships feel like teenage friendships. The conflict feels like a conflict, like, thrust upon. And it feels like Saturday morning cartoons. Like, where the character's like, oh no, I overslept. I have to get to my SAT test. Or like, oh my god, what is that weird thing? No, Gareth! Like, it's just, it has that vibe. So once that happened, in my head, they just all became cartoon characters. And I was able to read this way easier once I realized that that's the tone this book is going for. And it's not to say that those shows are bad or anything, because some of them, like even Winx Club, a lot of people watched that and really enjoyed it, and the plot ended up getting really good in the animated show. The Witches comic book series got really good. Even Totally Spies, I remember some episodes being really fucking engaging, but they have a tone. And the thing is, it takes a while to build up to them being really good. Like season 1 of Miraculous, it's a slog. It's a delightful slog, but it's a fucking slog. And that's what this show feels like. It feels like this book, it feels like the first few episodes in one of these shows.
I would like to agree with what you said, but I've literally never watched any of those shows because my mother did not believe in TV. Hello, I'm homeschooled. The scars have not fully healed yet. But for me, partly Maria read this first and then told me about that. So while I was reading it, like, that immediately was my impression of it. Is it's very much like a middle school book as written for middle schoolers. Again, not thinking there's secretly 30-year-old women reading this who want smut and or like the author just trying to be smarter for the audience. Like, it just feels very much like, oh, this is a chapter book where they specifically go in and make sure that the vocabulary is low. Not that this book does that. The writing style in this book is actually not terrible, but that's kind of the feeling I got. And overall with this book, it feels a lot, because I guess this is my only frame of reference, kind of like a fanfic of the characters, where, like, we'll talk about this more in terms of nothing really happening in the plot, but like the characters interacting with each other a lot. And it feels like, oh, okay, if this was a fanfic, we would like to read like, oh, there's some vague plot stuff happening over that way. But really, we're here to see, like, they touched hands. One of them had a traumatic thing happen and the other took care of them. That's the feeling I got.
And it also feels, because I said to Will, this feels very episodic, and I've been describing to you what happens in the first episode, and what I would argue is actually just the first half of the first episode. I think the first episode actually ends at a different point, but it feels almost like a fan fiction, where fan fiction has a serialized format. Chapters that are released kind of have a little bit of their own self-contained nature to what is happening in them, and the events in this, like, there are distinct periods of what is happening in it. So I would say that what would be the first episode of this, after she has this weird thing happen, she calls her friend Maggie. She explains this whole thing to Maggie, shows Maggie the weird handprint on her arm. Maggie's like, don't worry, we're going to figure this out. We'll do it together. And I would say that is like the first, and then she goes home. And I would say that would be the first episode of this, like, if this was a TV
If
show.
I remember correctly, I'm going to put timestamps in. You guys in the comments, tell me what you think each episode should be called, and I will change the timestamps to be titled that.
Episode 1, The Magic Handprint. And she's kind of terrified. And the back of the book describes it as this woman, like, attacks her. Like, she's attacked by a witch, and, like, that's not what happened. Even as you're reading it, you never think, like, oh, this lady's trying to hurt her. You're like, wow, this is a sad-looking lady covered in blood, reaching towards her, calling her names.
Another thing that kind of throws off the tone is if you look at the cover, and I'll put it up here, is that it, like, kind of looks more like a romance for an older crowd, because there's, like, a woman in an elegant dress.
It also feels a little second world fantasy.
Yeah, it does a little bit. So, like, it really should just be more like nerds with their backpacks is, like, more of the vibe you get, and I think would have been more accurate.
Because I went into this thinking it was a second world fantasy. I just saw the cover. He said it's called Keeper. And I went in thinking, and then I was like, SATs? This is not what I signed up for. But anyway, so this is, again, the start of the new episode. She goes to school the next day, and as they get to the parking lot, who should be there but that guy from last night at that thingy? Is that the right point? Is that what happened?
Like, everybody knows here, I depend on Maria because my memory is terrible. In this book especially, I'm going to depend on Maria because there is a large chunk of the middle. I simply do not remember what happens besides some broad character beats. This book is so boring. I can't remember almost anything that happens in it, except towards the end and, like, right at the beginning.
She goes to school. She's in English class. She falls asleep because she's really tired because she barely slept the night before. And again, this feels like a TV show. She falls asleep in the middle of class and she has a dream. And in the dream, she is seeing this spooky ghost lady, her life, and it picks up and her name's Josephine. Josephine comes home after a nice little dalliance with her lover, whose name is Henry. And her house is on fire and her family's dead. And then her father's like, Josephine, you're alive. And she's like, Papa, you're alive. And he's like, quick, you must go. You must run. They're coming for you. They're coming for it. And you're like, what is this it? Her dad gets killed. She runs off, and that's and then Lainey wakes up in the middle of her class screaming her little head off because, as one does when you watch someone get murdered in your dreams. She's super embarrassed. She leaves school. And again, that feels like a TV show. Like, I can see it being animated, like her waking up, and then being like, oh no, I'm in class. Runs out the door. And she ends up going somewhere. And I don't remember where it is, but except that when she comes outside, there are, like, some kids having a street fight in an alley, and she's like gets close and she's watching it, and there's this one guy in a leather jacket who's like getting beat up by all these other guys, and immediately I'm like, oh, it's the guy from the night before. It's fucking Ty. It has to be fucking Ty. And she's like looking at him, and then, like, he comes into the light after this one guy gets knocked out, and she's like, oh, it's that guy from the last night. And he's like, oh, hey, it's you. What are you doing here? And he ends up taking his jacket, or he took his jacket off during the fight, and he's like, bye, see ya. And then he just the woman who owns the establishment comes out and is like, what are you guys doing, having a fight? And he just walks by, and Lainey's like, wow, she didn't really notice him. That's weird. I wonder why. And you're like, okay, well, he's obviously magical in some way. Like, that has to be. So she takes this kid's leather jacket, and she ends up wearing it. At points, her and her friend decide to go to the library to try figure out who this lady Josephine is in her head. Later that night, they go home, and she's talking to she doesn't live with her parents. She lives with her Uncle Gareth. Her parents died when she was young in a car accident.
Well, not a cart accident, at least. It's just a car accident this time. That's the other part about this book. It completely pushes into certain tropes without any nuance or sense of like new life in them or breadth or authenticity. It just is like, her parents died mysteriously and she lives with her uncle, guys. Like at every point, this book is just not here to do anything new. And I don't remember if it's 5 or 10 years, but the author has talked about how this book took a really long time to write. She would kind of write it on and off throughout that time period. And it very much feels like a middle school plot that you would come up with when you were in middle school as a writer. And then she kind of just fleshed out what happens in it over time. But the overall structure of it is still very flawed in middle school, where you have some characters who are like you and your friends, and then they go and they have an adventure, and there's a hot guy who looks like James Dean.
Very true. But anyway, so, and not only does she live with Gareth, who's her uncle, Gareth's girlfriend is this lady named Serena, and she is like hippie, boho, cleanses the house, sages things, reads people's auras, and Lainey, even though Serena's been part of her life her entire fucking life, is weirdly like blasé about Serena, and like, because Serena's not like just around and doesn't. Serena tries to connect with Lainey, like, and there's a later part in the book where you're like, oh yeah, no, she's been actively trying to raise Lainey. So the Lainey being so blasé and like, oh no, that's just my uncle's girlfriend, it just feels really off. Like, nah, if your uncle has been like an adoptive father, congratulations, this lady is an adopted mother.
And it sounds like it was a long-term relationship too, from what I remember. It's not like, oh, he has girlfriends coming in and out.
Since they have been raising her, Serena and Gareth have been together. So the blaséness about it just felt really weird. But anyway, and Serena's like, you look a little off. What's the matter, Lainey? And she's like, I don't know. And then she's like, maybe you just need some sleep. And she goes to sleep, and then she's looking at a picture of her parents, and she realizes that her mother is wearing the same emerald pendant that the creepy ghost lady in her head, Josephine, has been wearing. What is this connection?
Interesting.
What is this? Ooh, the plot. She thickens. Except she does not. This is the level of information you have for the majority of the fucking book. Like, this is it. Congratulations. We are stagnating on the amount of information we have about what's going on until the last fucking fourth. She tells her friend Maggie, oh, look at this information. This lady's wearing the same thing as my mom. And Maggie's like, whoa, that's cool. Reference to comics, reference to Marvel, reference. Cool.
It really is like that. It's weird because it's like the author, and I'm not saying the author isn't a nerd, but it's like she's trying to write a nerd and doesn't really know how or have any references that she knows. She's just like, all right, let me look on the Wikipedia.
So another character that this reminded me of, but without any of the nuance or like hystericalness of it, is, if any of you have watched Community, there's a character on it, and I just referenced him by going cool, called Abed. He uses TV as a way to understand and like go through life, because he doesn't fully engage with people. He can't read a lot of emotions, and he really loves TV, and it is literally his coping mechanism and the ruler by which he measures what is happening around him, which makes it hysterical, really funny. And he is just like reference, cool. I literally just watched an episode where Annie's pretending to be him, and she's like, Star Wars, cool.
But in that show, it's like, it's clever at times, and also Danny Pudi is a really good actor, and so he has a crispness to him that makes it really work.
And there's also like, this is how he's attempting to understand the world. So it's played for laughs, but it is oftentimes played for emotion.
There are actual episodes where he's in like a psychotic state or psychosis, and like, it's claymation because this is how he's dealing with the events of his life at this point.
Again, that is way more than skin deep. It was like if you were trying to write an episode of Community without actually understanding who Abed was as a character or understanding the nuance of him. And that's what Maggie feels like. But anyway, she shows Maggie, and then she wakes up the next morning and she realizes, oh no, it's 7:20 and the thing is at 8 that she needs to get to for the SAT. And so she gets in the car.
We're still on episode 2, right?
Yeah, this is episode 2.
Okay, we're still in episode. Okay, cool.
Yeah, episode 2 is gonna end soon. Don't you worry.
Stay tuned.
So she's really sleepy. She has to run. She's catching all the red lights as she's going, and she's at a red light, and she's like, "Change, goddammit, just change!" And then it just changes to green, and she's like, "Oh, that was lucky." She gets to another one, and she's like, "God damn it, just change!" And then she's stuck behind a train, and she's like, "Oh, god damn it, I'm never gonna make it. If I just had 10 more minutes, if I woke up 10 minutes earlier." And then she looks at the clock, and suddenly it's 10 minutes earlier, and she's like, Wow, that's weird. I could have sworn maybe I am really sleepy. She takes the SAT. It goes by relatively normally. Oh, this is where she goes to meet up with Maggie at the library after the SAT. Something happens after this part. They go to the library, they look at all the stuff, they can't find anything. They don't go to the cemetery this night.
I literally am no use to you here because the next thing that I remember, they go to a cemetery. And I only remember that because you just said it and it sparked the memory. Like, I genuinely, okay, so here's the thing we're going to talk about in this book, because this is the basic structural problem that the book has. And it's weird because every book in creation does not have this problem, is that usually there is the plot that's happening in these kinds of books, right? Or the plot that's happening, and like, I don't know, the enemy is pursuing them, or increasingly weird things are happening around town, or monsters are coming around every once in a while, and they got to deal with that plot. And meanwhile, the character is coming into their power and discovering the magic within them, and, you know, character moments are happening. They find out betrayals and stuff like that. This book does not have that first pillar of things happening. It's just the character discovering things. And that sounds like it should be interesting in terms of maybe it's more of a character focused piece. It's not.
And it's not presented as a mystery, because it would be one thing if this presented itself as a mystery that you're trying to solve, but it's not. It's not doing that at all.
It's so rote and by the numbers what's actually going on that you immediately know. And so it's not like, okay, there's some kind of weird eldritch power warping the town, and then you figure out the whole time she was a fish man, or like, you know, something. You guys can tell I'm a really talented writer. Check out our Savior's Rewrite video for other high quality story ideas.
I'm actually going to go by pretty fast because I'm pretty sure something else happens, and this is going to suck for our episode breakdown. But episode 2 basically ends without anything. Like, she sees Josephine a couple more times. Oh no, she has another flashback into Josephine's life. That's what happens. And something like shitty happens with Josephine.
Josephine is running on the run, and she's got like a book with her or something.
Oh yeah, the amulet she's wearing opens up and turns into a book. Like, she's able to transform it, and she's like, "This is what they're after. They're coming for this."
And then Josephine's boyfriend shows up, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're here!" And then they have PG sex.
And I think that's where episode 2 would end. The next episode starts back up on Monday. They go to school, and guess whose car is in the parking lot? And she's also like, she goes to school and she doesn't want to go to school, so she's wearing ties, like the jacket she got from the tie guy, whose name is Tyler, by the way. First off, Ty is the name of like a 4Kids TV. That was a channel that played like anime dubs, like witches.
It really does sound like a 12-year-old's idea of what a cool older teenager's name is. Yeah.
Yo, my name's Ty. That kind of vibe. But his name's Tyler. You know, it's not even like his name is actually Ty. And at first I thought maybe, and again, because I was in that 4Kids TV, I read him as Asian at first, like just like this, because like I think Asian guys, like, and if you watched enough anime, the like aloof, mysterious magic guy, there's like 900 Asian character or anime characters that fall into that trope. So I read him as Asian first, but his name is just Tyler, and he could be, but I don't think so. He's never described that way. That's just how Maria pictured him. And he's at school. They end up is this where she has the nightmare? Actually, oh God, now that we're doing this.
Yeah, he's in class with her when she has the nightmare. I remember that distinctly, so it was probably before this that they met. Again, this is one of the reasons we're having trouble remembering what's happening, is because there's no real spine to layer all these things onto.
The first 3/3 of the first 3/4 of this book is literally just, oh, who is Josephine? What is happening? We need to figure out who Josephine is, with no real understanding of what is happening to her, because like Lainey's obviously magical, but she doesn't realize it until the beginning of the last fourth. And so this isn't what's like, ooh, things are changing with me in me. I can't control something, like, and stuff is happening. It's literally just, who is this lady? Like, am I having a psychotic breakdown? What is happening? Her and Ty end up bonding. She freaks out about something. He takes her to a place like a boxing place, and he's like, hit this bag, and she like hits it, and she feels really good, and like they kind of bond and have a nice time. She does stuff with Maggie again. Then the next significant thing is Maggie's like, we're gonna contact the other side. We're gonna do, like, we're going to a graveyard. We're finding Josephine. We're going to contact her. Oh, you also find out when they were doing the boxing thing that Ty's dad is dead.
Tragic backstory.
They go to the graveyard, and this is where the first, like, actual anything that resembles action or a risk comes in. My God. Because at this point, Lainey has never been in danger. prior to this, and at this point, we're like 2/4 into the book. Like, guys, nothing has really happened. But they go to the cemetery. While they're there, Lainey's looking at stuff, and then a tree attacks her.
There's a whomping willow.
Yeah, like wraps her in branches, starts suffocating her, Maggie, and like she's trying to get out of it, and in her head she's like, "Let me go, let me out." And then she sees a flash of green, and the tree lets go of her. She falls back. Ty and Maggie both saw the tree try to eat her, and are like, "What the heck?" Oh no, this is literally the beginning of the last fourth. Oh my god! So the last fourth, or I'd say maybe the last third, is where all the action happens. Holy shit! It's so, because I didn't have this reaction as I was reading it, because I read it at different points on a couple different days. And so I was just like, oh, you're picking it. So the first half is real slice of life. Anyway, she gets hit by the tree, attacked by the tree. They're like, oh shit, what's happening? Maggie is like, you need to talk to Serena. She's basically your stepmother, adoptive stepmother, and she's a spiritually lady. And if there's any person who may know what the fuck is happening, it's her. And also, because when they get in the car and like she's sitting in the car like chilling after being almost eaten by a tree, her eyes are green, and they've always been like hazel. And so she's freaking out, and they're like, Maggie's like, nah, fuck it, we're taking you to Serena. So they go to Serena.
This is where she overhears all of the backstory.
Oh my
through a door.
God. So they go in, and Gareth is there, and Gareth or Serena are talking, and they're like, Serena's like, we have to tell her. Things are getting dangerous. I can sense it. They're coming for her. We've tried hard to protect her for all these years, but we can't stop it. They're coming for her, just like her mother. And Gareth's like, no, I promised her mother I'd keep her safe. The cloaking spells are working. And Serena's like, the cloaking spells aren't working. They don't say she's a witch yet, because they're like, her mother was very powerful, but like there's this whole conversation happening, and you as the reader like completely follow it. But Lainey is like, this is so complicated. What is happening? I'm not making fun of Lainey. The way Lainey is reacting is normal. Nobody would hear this and be like, yes, I'm a witch. So I'm making fun of Lainey, but I'm like...
Lainey makes sense as a character, and she does feel sort of like a real person in that way, and especially she feels like a kind of scared teenager at times, which I liked. I don't know how much other people would like it, because I know some people find those kinds of characters annoying. Again, I didn't personally. I'm at a stage in life where, like, I feel bad for them. I don't identify with them enough to be frustrated.
And listen, she thinks she's going through a psychotic breakdown, and then a tree attacked her. So you know what? Fuck it.
Her bestie won't stop making comic book references.
The guy she likes just saw her almost get eaten by a tree.
But then he held her afterwards.
And they held hands in the car.
Oh, yeah.
Her romance with Ty is really cute in the sense that it's just cute. The majority of the initial part of it is like them like talking with each other, her being kind of lame, and then getting comfortable with him, and then like they held hands. Like, okay.
It's sort of like what we talked about in The Wrath and the Dawn, where like if you don't care about the setup, it's nice. Some people just want the emotionality of like that crackling romance. In this case, it's not a crackling romance; it's just kind of a sweet romance. But it also works a little bit better. It's more than anything, it's just like there's very little tension involved, and the thing is, there's no other tension in the book going on. So your brain kind of tries to default to that being interesting, but it doesn't.
Yeah, and so the thing is, what they could have done is there's going to be a plot twist with Ty that isn't actually a plot twist. You as a reader immediately understand what is happening, but Lainey gets upset, and they should have brought in some of that, like, oh no, what is this? Who is Ty? Way earlier, but he feels and acts like a good guy the whole time, so there is no tension. It just feels like two kids who have a crush on each other acting out that crush in a realistic way. Gareth leaves, they talk to Serena, and she's like, Serena, I heard everything. Also, a tree tried to eat me. You need to tell me everything now. And Serena's like, your mother was a witch, but from a very powerful family called the Ducarmonts. They were one of the last witchy families, but then this other guy who's out to get them was like, no, not today, and attacked them. So that's how your mother died. Your dad, we think, did die in a car accident, but we're not actually sure. Your mom was the keeper of this thing called the Grimoire, which is a magic spell book that's really important that this other dude was trying to hunt her from. He got the book, killed your mother, and we've been trying to keep you safe because if anybody found out about you, they'd come and try to kill you too. And she's like, holy shit, I'm a witch? What the heck? And Serena's like, listen, we've been trying to like cloak you. We're gonna have to deal with stuff. You need to go home and talk to Gareth. So they get in the car, and everybody's like, whoa, that was kind of crazy. And Ty reacts to all of this really nonchalantly, which, again, should be a little bit suspicious at this point. But I think if we look at it from the point of view of Lainey is so freaked out. She's had so much thrown on her. She's not actually taking time to analyze the reactions of people around her. It's fine. But anyway, she goes to talk to Gareth. They have a fight because Gareth has been hiding this from her whole life. He also explains a little bit that he is not actually her uncle.
He's a fairy.
He's one of the Fae. He is a Fae swordsmith. Serena, Gareth, and her mother were best friends. Also, her father never knew that her mother was a witch. They hid it from him too, and Lainey's like, oh good, at least I wasn't the only one lied to for years. Which is such a teenage reaction to have.
I felt like her relationship with Gareth was a little too wholesome in terms of, again, this book just doesn't do anything interesting. The two of them are like besties. There's very little like resentment.
But it also was just underdeveloped. Like, if there had been more descriptions, like if there had been some scenes of her and Gareth before shit hit the fan, like before Josephine showed up, you could have built a much more realistic feeling relationship. But the problem is, by the time Gareth finally shows up in the book, she's just seen a ghost lady and has a weird handprint on her arm. Like, what are we doing? So her and Gareth get into a fight. She leaves. She drives around for a period of time, ends up at a train tracks where a bunch of kids hang out. Apparently at like 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock, these trains come through at 8-minute intervals, and they play this game of chicken where two boys will go stand on the tracks. Whoever can last the longest before jumping out of the way of the train is, the winner of that round. And so she watched some guys do it, and she looks at them, and she's really mad at this point, and just like in her feels super emotional. And she watches these boys doing this thing, and they're like exhilarated, they're in control, having the time of their lives, and she's like, fuck it, I want some control in my life. So she jumps on the train tracks. Also, her friend Maggie called her and was like, yo, where the fuck are you? Gareth told me you stormed out. And she's like, I'm at the train tracks. And she's like, Lainey, go the fuck home. What are you doing? Lainey doesn't.
In a more plot interesting book, I would have actually kind of liked this sequence in that it's a little stupid, but it's an interesting way of, and this is the thing I see a lot of books not do, in that this actually tells you a lot about Lainey, and it also it makes you identify with her because you're also having a little bit, again, you don't a lot because this is not a very good book, but a little bit of the same emotion, and so you and her become a little bit on the same page. A lot of times characters will just say what they think or feel, but in this case she is actually making an action, a concrete action off of how she feels, and so that actually helps define her character very well. There's a lot of books that we've read from Authortube that I wish would do more stuff like this to make you really feel like, oh, okay, this is who the character is.
And I actually do like this scene. And again, it's not as good as it could have been had this book been a little bit better. But it really, and this was the thing that I was talking about, where like the character makes a dumb decision, but I didn't sit here going, why would she do that? Was relevant. Like, she knows it's dumb. And like afterwards, she's like, "Oh my god, why that was fucking dumb," which is great. I love those moments. She's the last person to jump before the train comes by. She's exhilarated. She's feeling great. And then Ty comes, and her and Ty like argue about something. And then like something happens. I think they kiss, and his eyes light up.
They make out, and there's like a storm in the sky above.
But his eyes light up, and she's like, "Why the fuck did your eyes light up?" Because he's like, yeah, "I knew it. You were my calling," or whatever. And you're like, "What the fuck?" And it turns out he's a Praetorian, which is this group of supernatural people that are protectors. They like protect innocents, but they will get their calling, which is a specific person that they are supposed to protect and take care of. And once they kiss, his eyes glow gold, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you're the person I'm supposed to be protecting." And she gets mad. She's like, "You're fucking magic too?" And then she's like, "Oh god, you reacted to everything way too quickly and easily and fine. Oh my god, of course you're magic. You've been lying to me as well." And I'm like, "Lainey, you met him like 4 days ago. The man had no reason to spill his guts to you prior to this point, my love." But anyway, she's an angry teenager. A lot of stuff has been happening. This is how she reacts. And then he's like, "No, I want to protect you. This is what I do." And they end up calming down. He takes her home. Oh no, she ends up going into like almost a panic attack, and she causes a giant storm to happen. And he's like, "Lainey, I think this is you. I think you're making this storm." And she's like, "Oh shit, how do I stop it?" And he calms her down and gets her to stop. They go back and they talk to Serena and Gareth, or Serena calls because Serena has had a vision of these people called scavengers coming and looking for Lainey, because there's this dude in the master. He's the big bad. I don't know, he started using dark magic.
He wants the thing that she has that will be like super lots of magic.
Because there's this thing that happens that they say in the, and again, this would have been really cool had it been played with more, which is magic always leaves a mark, which is using magic always shows itself. So like when she started using magic like in a big ways, her eyes turned green because that was the cloaking coming off of her when Josephine touched her, which, because basically Josephine is talking to her through death, like she's on the other side, she's in this place called the Veil, and that takes a lot of magic. So when Josephine touched her, it was magic. And with dark magic, it fucks you up a little bit. So the master has basically been using all of his magic just to keep himself alive and to counteract the effects of the dark magic. And there's a spell in the grimoire that will allow him to siphon magic from other supernaturals, which means he'll have more than enough magic to do all the shit he wants to do. And that's why he wants the grimoire. When they got Lainey's mother, though, and they got the grimoire, what they didn't realize, because they killed Lainey's mom, was that they have to have one of the Ducarmont witches to open the grimoire. So all they have is this fucking necklace with nothing on it. like they can't get into it. So he has it, but he can't use it. They've been trying to keep Lainey's existence a secret, because if he found out she existed. But he has these guards, and the guards are like his bloodhounds. A lot of them are described as lycans or shapeshifter people. Underneath the guards, though, are these scavengers, which are other supernatural people who will turn other supernaturals in to the master for money. So if you seem like a powerful supernatural person, they will literally just kidnap you. Every time you use magic, it lets out pulses that other magic users can feel. And she has been, she turned back time. She was fucking with red lights. She defended herself from the dryad tree. She made this storm. The scavengers are coming. And she also now knows that the guard knows Lainey exists. Serena has this vision. She knows that they're coming for her. So they're like, oh shit, we've got to protect Lainey. How are we going to do this? And Gareth is like, I'm going to run away somewhere else. I'm going to use lots of magic. So hopefully they'll come follow me and they'll leave you guys alone. And Lainey's like, no, Gareth, you can't do this. Oh, also Gareth trains her how to use a knife in a knife. Now, granted, at no point does the book try to tell you that she is a really good knife, dagger fighter now. But it just, my guy, because Gareth makes swords. He has a whole magic room in the house where he keeps all of his weapons, and I'm like, why didn't you at least have her in karate for years?
I was thinking that
if you were going to train her to fight, put her in some form of self-defense class, and that way when you bring in knives into it, she also has some decent hand-to-hand combat training. What are we doing anyway? Anyway, and he's like, here's the knife I made, the dagger I made for you, take it, I'm going to go and try to draw them away. And she's like, don't die, Gareth, I love in you. And so he runs off. They have a few days, and then she's trying to control her magic and not use it, but it happens unconsciously. And Ty's like, well, maybe we'll do something to distract you from it. How about we go to that carnival that's being advertised all over school? And she's like, that would be nice, like a date. And he's like, well, it doesn't have to be a date if you don't want it to be. And she's like, no, I'd like it to be a date. And then it cuts to her getting ready for the date. Gareth's been gone for 4 days. He called 2 days ago saying he was fine, but they haven't heard from him since. Maggie's getting her dressed for the date.
This is the part where, I felt bad for Maggie because nobody ever compliments her. She also is apparently looking really good, and everyone just ignores her. And she's hey guys, don't lie, I look good. And Tyler's like, he doesn't say anything.
And again, what happened to that guy you went on the date? Maggie's internal life, anything that, Maggie stops feeling like her own. Because, in the first chapter, Maggie is going on a date with a guy that she met at this thing. Maggie wants to go to those kinds of events that Lainey doesn't normally want to go to. Also, Maggie calls her every time something happens. She goes, holy crap, Kitten Styles.
I would have liked for Tyler and her to have a relationship where either he does kind of, be nice to her back, oh, you do look pretty, or he doesn't know how to handle it. I think that also would have been kind of funny if he had a bit of a Jocelyn vibe from Kashiel.
Yeah, I would have loved it if they would have developed an actual little something, friendship, frenemy, something, but it doesn't happen. It feels very one-sided, especially since she goes with them to the carnival, and then she gets there and she's like, oh look, there's Sally Mae from sociology, I'm gonna go hang out with her immediately. But anyway, there's a cute scene with them eating corn dogs. They start riding some rides, and then all of a sudden there's a fire. And again, guys, this is literally the last fourth of all of this actiony stuff that I've been describing. Gareth having to go, the tree getting her, the explanations of what's happening is in the last hour and a half if you're listening to the audiobook at 1.5 speed. A fire is started in the corn maze, and she's like, oh no, that's a fire. And then Ty's like, it's a magical fire. Somebody did this. They're trying to smoke out, and then they're like, oh no, the scavengers are here. But the fire is blazing, and it's getting to other parts of the carnival, and Maggie is at the top of a Ferris wheel, and the Ferris wheel operator, the machinery's overheating, and he can't get them down, and oh no, Maggie's going to die and burn alive in a metal fire, which actually fucking terrifying.
I like that Maggie's not chill about it. Maggie's like freaking out, which feels like a very human reaction to have.
And Lady's like, I gotta save them! And Ty's like, no, they're definitely gonna know you exist if you do that. And then they find Maggie, and she's like, I have to save Maggie. And he's like, God damn it, I can't stop you from saving your best friend. So she summons a storm, which immediately puts out the fire. I think people should have died in the corn maze, but again, this book is not trying to be...
It's middle school. It's very middle school.
And again, we're not saying that derogative.
No, in this case, not really. This has a tone, and I respect the tone it's going for. I just wish it was better.
It's like miraculous. People don't really die in miraculous, you know?
I agree with that reference because I know what it is.
Even the people that were in the corn maze that was completely covered with fire are just injured, and they're like, okay, we gotta leave. There's scavengers here. And they start going to the car, but Lainey's really drained and not doing hot, so they're kind of like dragging her back to the car, but then the scavengers come after them, and there's 3 scavenger guys. Eventually they're stuck behind a truck, and Ty's like, I'm gonna go fight them, you guys run to the car. And so she's like, no, don't do this. And he's like, listen, I'm not sacrificing myself, I'm trying to give you guys a head start. He's like, I'm gonna be okay, you need to get the fuck out of here. And so he goes to fight them, and Maggie's like, okay, let's go now. And Lainey's like, no. And she's like watching what's happening instead of fucking off and going, which gives one of the guys enough time to start following them again. And I was like, fuck you, Lainey. This was one of those moments where I was like, no, this was dumb. And this doesn't feel in character for Lainey. Why would you do this? Your life is literally in danger, and you are drained as hell right now. But anyway, so this one guy starts attacking her. She's like attempting to fight him, not doing well, because again, she only had one night of training, and it wasn't enough. Maggie jumps on this guy's back to try get her off. He like throws Maggie off. He ends up turning into a wolf, and you're like, oh, he's a lichen.
That was one of the most blasé parts of this book earlier when her uncle, I forget his name already, was explaining to her about stuff, because you're like, okay, there are witches in this world, and then all of a sudden he's like, nope, there's a bunch of magical communities. We got lichen, we got
fae,
nymphs, we got
seers.
It's literally like the author was like, okay, you know, a generic fantasy setting, that's what we got, guys. Like, there's no attempt to be like interesting or unique with it.
Or like, no, of course there's no werewolves. Like I always like the ones where like there's witches, and they're like, if witches exist, are there vampires and werewolves? Like, no, you've been reading too much. Like, what are you doing? Like, none of that. Anyway, Ty ends up coming to save her. He snaps the guy's neck, and he killed the other guy, but one of the dudes got away. They end up getting back to the house. Serena had been calling them for ages, but Lainey had her phone on silent, which is really dumb if you know your like life is kind of in danger. And also, like, you've been waiting for a call from Gareth. Why would you have your phone on silent? But anyway, basically Serena's like, my vision has changed, I see you dying. They get back, they're like, oh shit, they found us, what are we gonna do? And they basically hatch this plan where because Serena's team like, let's pack up and hide, and Lainey's like, no, fuck that, like, they're just gonna continue, like, we're just gonna be running forever. She's like, let's steal back the grimoire, let's get it back, and then eventually I can be trained how to be a little witch lady, and we'll be good. And they're like, how are we going to do that? And then it turns out there's going to be a big like ball that the master holds regularly for his peeps.
I did think it was funny that she's like, why does he hold a ball? And they're like, he just likes to do fancy stuff, which is so like,
yeah, he likes being bougie.
I just kind of like that as like, oh, I wanted to write this thing, why does he do it? Because sometimes people are weird like that. It was like a good excuse.
She's like, okay, we'll have a distraction team, and some of us will try to look for the grimoire. And then the other thing that Serena sees in her visions is this the Heteria so there's all these different magical factions and magical supernatural creatures, and once upon a time there was a civil war between all of them. It didn't go well, and eventually they came together and they picked a representative from each of these groups to be part of the Heteria, which was going to be the people who ruled. The master eventually came in and was like, no, fuck you, I'm king. Serena sees that there's a new baby Heteria that's forming to try fight against the master, and Serena's like, if we can find them, because I saw who they were in my dream, in my vision, if we can find them, they might be able to help us get the grimoire back. So they go to this party, and what they do to try confuse the scavengers, and it's a weirdly dumb idea. They disguise Maggie to look like Lainey, but they don't disguise Lainey to look like someone else. And so it's just two Lainies. So they go to this party. One of the scavengers, while Serena and real Lainey are off trying to find the grimoire. One of the scavengers finds Maggie, drags her up before the master. He waves off her
glamour.
and it's like, this is just a human. And then Ty comes up, and Ty's like, oh no, she's mine. That guy stole her because he's a jealous ass, punk ass bitch. And the master's like, why is he, like, who are you? Why are you familiar? And he's like, I'm one of yours. And he, like, reveals his chest, and it's got the markings that the master, which I actually like this design, it's 2 triangles that overlap to make an M, and it's literally tattooed into his fucking chest. And so, like, Lainey sees this and she's like, oh no, he's one of the master's men. He's been working for the master this whole time. Like, bitch, you'd be dead. You would have been taken in. This is a really weird long game. He gained your trust ages ago.
There really is no, like, why would he not have told the master before this thought?
And so what I immediately thought was, oh, this guy used to work for the master, or maybe his dad worked for the master and he was forced into this, but this isn't the life he wanted and he ran away. Because, like, he likes Lainey. You know he likes Lainey. At no point during this, because even when he reveals Maggie, he doesn't immediately, like, he doesn't reveal Maggie, but when he's like, yeah, no, Maggie's just my human bitch, he doesn't go, and Lainey's over there. Meanwhile, Lainey's, like, super pissed, like, I hate him, fuck you, you betrayer, you traitor. And I'm like, he still hasn't revealed who you are, or Serena. Like, what are you doing? Like, calm down. And this was one of those moments where it felt like drama for the sake of drama, and it didn't feel realistic, because I feel like, given everything they've been through and the fact that, again, he did not reveal their presence to the master in this moment, it is very obvious that he's still on their side. The master starts letting some of the Lycans fuck around with Maggie and some of the shapeshifters, and so she's forced to come forward, and she's like, no, stop. And he's like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Lainey du Carmont. And he was like, yes, come, open the grimoire. Otherwise I shall kill your friends. And so he brings out the grimoire, which is, again, that little pendant. Also, Josephine is her ancestor.
We never would have guessed it.
They bring out the grimoire, and there's, like, a masked guy who's like, open this, Lainey. Open the grimoire, or else. And then he takes off his mask, and it's Gareth. And what I didn't mention was, once upon a time, the master killed Josephine's lover guy, Henry, then brought him back to life, but evil, to try and get Josephine to do, like, open the grimoire, which she didn't do. And so now Lainey is faced with Gareth, and so she immediately knows, like, oh man, he killed Gareth, and this is Gareth being puppeted from the dead to try get me to do this. And Josephine standing in the corner, and again, in a different book, this could have been such a cool scene, because it's Josephine looking at her like, you gotta do it. I couldn't do it. Because Josephine couldn't actually kill Henry. Like, she hits him and disables him, but she couldn't kill the form of her lover. And so, like, Josephine's there staring at her, and Lainey knows that what she has to do. She has to kill the already dead Gareth. And she does it by using the dagger he gave her, and the one fighting thing he mentions, or that gets mentioned, that he taught her was to stab people up through the bottom of their jaw. And she does that. She literally just stabs, and, like, oh God, what a way for your first kill to go. That's traumatic. But anyway, she explodes with magic, burns the building down. She wakes up later. The Heteria got them and shifted them out somewhere else. Maggie has a bite mark from one of the shifters, which means she's gonna turn into a shifter. Again, shapeshifter, not Lycan. And Maggie's super pumped about this. Not like, oh my God, what about my family? Am I gonna be able to be with them anymore? What am I doing? She's like, wow, this is my radioactive spider bite.
Yeah, she doesn't even act like she has a family. That's hilarious.
And, like, the thing is, there's this cute moment with her father that's actually really endearing, where, like, her dad likes to do impressions, and there's this point where, like, they were told to, like, wear seatbelts and be safe in, like, impressions of Donald Duck and someone else, you know? And so, like, and now you've thrown your life away and you're happy? Like, it's not even like, what about my because I think it would have been way better and would have made the comic book stuff feel like to come to terms with it, because there's the idea of, like, you are desensitized to all this kind of stuff because of all of these things that you read and you ingest, and then when it affects you personally, for her to be like, holy shit, and freak out. But she doesn't. She's super fucking pumped. She's like, I've wanted to be a superhero my whole life. Woohoo!
Yeah, that would have been a much better character arc and a sobering moment at the end for her to realize the cost of actually getting bitten by the radioactive spider that she talks about.
Absolutely. But that's not what happens. The Heteria is helping them. They're traveling around with them, like, escaping from stuff. Lainey's not doing hot. You know, Gareth died. She feels really, like, hollow. She's having an appropriate reaction to, having to kill and potentially killing a lot of other people. I don't even know if it's that. Like, it could have been played up more. The book ends on a little bit too hopeful of a note, and I would have liked it to be a little bit darker given what she just lived through. But again, this book struggles with emotionality. Like, you don't feel things as much as you should. And again, I think that's part of the narration style getting in the way. But basically what happens is at the end of the book, she sees Josephine, and Josephine like touches her and brings her somewhere else. But this time she doesn't just show Lainey a memory, she takes Lainey through to the Vale with her so they can actually talk. Because this whole time the only thing Josephine has been able to say is Lainey, Lainey. That's it.
By the way, there's not one reference to The Graduate. And if you know that movie, you know why I said that.
I've never seen it.
There's a part where he's hitting the glass and going, Lainey, and it's very famous. And you're a heathen for not knowing any literature besides the Winx Club.
I apologize. Anyway,
we bring different things. I bring a knowledge of classic film and cinema history, and you know about the Winx Club.
You can say that to my master's degree. It's in here.
We discovered that before.
Yeah, I've never taken it out of that before. And I was like, which degree is this? It is my master's. Anyway, and basically now that she can finally talk to Josephine, Josephine's like, listen, I'm not going to be able to talk to you for much longer. I am absolutely running out of magic, and it takes a lot to be able to talk through the veil. I'm going to have to actually just go die now. But I wanted to tell you, now that Gareth is dead, she shows her a memory. And in this memory, it's her mother talking to her as she sleeps as a young girl. And she takes the grimoire and she like burns it, and it just magic ashes into the air. And then she takes that and she funnels the green light from the grimoire into Lainey. And what you discover is the grimoire that she stole back from what's-his-face is a fake necklace. Like, it's not an actual, like, she opens it and it's all blank pages. And she was like, what the fuck? Gareth died? This whole thing happened and it wasn't even the actual grimoire? Why would you let me do that? And what Josephine says is she basically didn't know. When her mother did this, she made a magical like thing with Gareth where like nobody besides Gareth knew what she had done.
And Gareth didn't know till he died or something weird, or he was physically unable to tell people or know about it.
Once he died, the spell broke, and thus Josephine was able to have access to that information. And so basically, Lacey is the grimoire. The grimoire spells and all the information is literally inside her. She's like, oh shit, that's a lot. And Josephine's like, good luck. Rock on.
I'm Audi 500.
Yeah, and then she's like, I'm going to the Vale, look. And then she points, and there's her mom and her dad holding hands on the other side. And then Gareth's next to them. Josephine goes through the Vale. And that's basically how the book ends. Like, Lainey's like, no, we're going to fight. And that's the end of the book. And again, it's not a bad book. And the book is, like, this is what the book is trying to do. But I argue it could have been done better in multiple ways.
You know, back when we read Children of Blood and Bone, and I came to the realization that I don't like YA, that I'm actually not YA trash, I'm fanfic trash, which was an important revelation in my life and has changed many things. I said that there are still certain criticisms that you can levy at YA besides like the prose are simple or the character thoughts are simple, and that some things like pacing or structure can still be criticized. And that's the problem with this book. It's not so much the tone, it's that the structure of the book itself is not functional because you're missing that spine of plot and tension to layer on all these character moments to. So it is very much like a fanfic where it's like, okay, things are brewing in the distance, but really we're here for Ty and Lainey to get to know each other and have hand brushes, and we already like this couple, so we're already here for this. And like Maria said, there is a very episodic quality to it, and I think it comes from having written had the idea for this so long before she actually wrote it, which is interesting because apparently the sequel, which we are not going to read because, oh my god, my eyes might bleed out if I have to.
I might read it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like,
okay.
The thing is, I'm interested enough just to see what happens and to see if Seeker is a better book than this one, because it's the second one.
You know, that's actually an interesting point because from what I understand, she was not happy with how it came out because she only had about 6 months to write it after having so long to read this one. So it actually would be interesting to read in terms of the author and her growth. All right, you've won me over.
Yeah, and also because if it was written in a shorter time frame, does that actually benefit
the book?
We can see a huge issue with me for this, and I'm going to compare this to this other book series. I think it's somewhere here. I think it's called the Air Chronicles, like the Enchanter's Heir, the Warrior Heir. It's by an author. Oh, Yes. And this is by Cinda Williams Shima, who I really love her Seven Realms series. It's one of my favorite YA series ever. But I was reading these ones, and this was her first one. And you can really tell the first one, which is called Warriors Air, you can tell it was her first book. It is nowhere near as strong as the other ones.
I think I've read that, and I think I hated it.
Warriors Air does what this book is trying to do better. It's not great, and there's some tonal issues with it, but it starts with action. Like it's same premise. Small sleepy town in the US. Kid grows up thinking he's normal. Nope, turns out you're magical, and there's all of these magical factions around you, and there's a essential conflict happening. And before he fully understands what's happening, somebody tries to kill him and capture him. So there is, from the get-go, tension, action. There was a great scene in a library with people being attacked by a weird guy that they had no idea what was happening. And so there's a way better build of tension, where what Will was saying is you have to have those two plots. There's the main character trying to live their life while something weird is happening to them, and the actual plot and conflict coming in from the beginning in small ways before the climax.
It reminds me of a movie, and this is not by any means a unique movie or a unique plot, but this is just what my brain kind of remembers, called I Am Number 7. And I mostly remember it because Diana Agron is a really pretty actress. But in that one, it's much shorter because there is a few action beats before, the action hits the character. But because it's only 2 hours and the last half hour to 45 minutes is the action part, I feel like this book almost would have worked better as a movie, where they have to condense a lot of that stuff at the beginning. And so one Whomping Willow attack is enough to actually draw some tension in. And if you have like one more action scene, then you've got at least one per every 45 minutes. And then you hit the end.
I think the Whomping Willow scene should have happened in first quarter, Josephine pops up. Who the fuck is Josephine? Second quarter, Whomping Willow. Third quarter, the explanation of who she is, what's happening to her. Last quarter, dealing with the master, instead of all of those cool things being literally in the last third of the book. If you had spread out some of that stuff, because there's a lot of action that happens, and you could keep all the other things, just take some of those stuff that happens in that last quarter, spread it out earlier so that there is some tension. Because the thing is, you as a reader know that someone's going to come after Lainey. And so you're expecting it kind of from the beginning, and it just takes fucking forever to happen.
And it's such a basic thing. Like, I've read stories like this before, and that's always what happens. So it's weird this doesn't. Or like you were saying, just restructure some of it. So like have Ty's betrayal happen at the, 70% mark.
Have there be things that you're like, is this guy good or bad from before? Because like I said, Ty is mainly, besides the fact that he gets into some street fights, because you get the idea that he just likes fighting for the sake of fighting. Like
he's a bad boy.
And so, but you don't think like, oh, is he a bad boy? It's like, oh, he's a bad boy, but in like a good boy, bad boy way. And so by bringing some of those things in earlier, like maybe she sees the symbol for the master the first time with Ty, but she doesn't know what it means at that point. But then at a later point, when she's discussing everything with Serena, she sees the symbol for the master, and she's like, why does that look familiar? And then later she's with Ty at the carnival, and she sees it again, and she's like, what the fuck? But then he saves her life, so she's like, okay, maybe I'm misreading, maybe this isn't. And then at the end, for that like thing to happen, that would have been so much better. And again, I'm not actually plot.
We're not doing a rewrite of this book, guys. It's just not happening. It's so weird to have, and again, she's not a super talented writer, but the prose in this are fine. The dialogue, besides all of the stupid comic book references, is fine. The characterization is fine. So it's weird to have this mediocre level with such terrible fundamentals in terms of the structure of the story. So actually, you're kind of right. It would be interesting to see what happens in the sequel and if it actually gets better or if it's worse.
Because I feel like the plot finally kicked in, and so the sequel might just be a fast mover. And the other reason, because as you guys know, I kind of like slow slice of life. Like I was really okay with those moments in Spinning Silver where like things were happening that didn't necessarily aid the overall plot. The problem is there has to be that takes a level of mastery in your prose and in your atmosphere and in your world building that this doesn't have.
And I would argue there's actually a lot happening in Spinning Silver in the slice of life stuff. You have the whole plot of Miriam bringing back her father's business and making it work. Wanda's internal life is really fascinating. She's going to work for Miriam, so she's tied into that plot as well. There's actually things you're looking forward to that are driving the plot forward instead of, and also you're not quite sure where the plot is going, which is different than this where we know exactly where the plot is going.
In terms of the actual huge plot, like going into the level of detail about how the trading works, and like you trade this thing for that thing, and now Miriam's made like 100 gold off of what was essentially just like some red fabric at the start, like, and how she's like economic, and then Wanda learning the maths and being able to, like, that stuff doesn't actually input, like, especially like Wanda doesn't input the plot, but it adds a richness to the world, and it is incredibly interesting, and it impacts Wanda as a character that makes it really fantastic to read. And this author just, it doesn't have it. Honestly, this book, for the first 3/4 feels like the first 2 or 3 episodes of a TV show before it's gotten interesting. You know, like there's that mid-season pickup where like it finally, like, you're like, okay, like generally when you start a TV show, and not all TV shows, but it takes a while for you to really get into it.
It's very CW in that way,
Yes.
where it's like, okay, we got to wait 5 episodes before things start to really settle in and become interesting. And I kept thinking of it as a CW show in my head, even though, again, this is much younger than CW. CW would just have some like random sex scenes thrown in.
2 girls making out for gay bait, like queer baiting.
Oh, this should have been a CW show. You're right.
No, stop. Anyway, I'm not saying that you have to have the action a little bit sooner, but for what this particular book was trying to do, and the tone and the narration style, that would have helped. It wasn't trying to be atmospheric spinning silver. It just has a little bit of pacing issues. And by a little bit, a lot of it. But like, again, it's not, compared to the other two, infinitely superior. Compared to Savior's Champion and Cyborg Tank, infinitely better.
Almost more interesting, despite how incredibly boring it is. It's because the thing is that the book understands the tone it is, and it doesn't think it's a hot shot in the way that like Savior's Champion and the Cyborg Tinkerer really think they're hot shit, and that they're really like good, and that you really care about the characters, or you like, they're serious books. And serious in air quotes there, because the authors think they're serious, but they're not really. And so when they're not, it's actively frustrating. Whereas with this book, you don't. You're just like, okay, this is kind of trying to be a harmless book, as poor as parts of it are. And so I don't hate it. I just would cry my eyes out if I had to read it again.
And it just, because it's the first part, it takes so long for stuff to start happening. And like, I'm going to make a comment about Maggie. Again, Maggie has no, and again, she's not the viewpoint character, but there's no internality to her. There's no sense of what she wants out of her life.
There's no agency.
To feel like her entire life goal is to get bit by a radioactive spider is really weird. Like, what did she actually want to do with her life? Like, was she going to go to college? What was she going to major in? Did she, that guy she went on the date with, how did the fucking date go? We never find out how the date went. She never sees him. When they go to the carnival, why doesn't she invite the guy?
Little things like that would have added so much to just making the book feel real and the world feel real. And it could also have contrasted with Tyler, where she's like, why don't you have other things going on in your life besides Lainey? It's interesting, because one of the things I always like to try to do with my writing, and not to be one of those annoying people who always mention their book at every moment, is to add like little things that make other characters feel like they're doing their own thing. Like, this could have been their story, and like their story is just intersecting the main character's story, because that makes the author's hand so much more invisible. And you're right, Maggie doing that would have been so much more interesting and made the book feel better. And actually, it would have made Lainey feel like a better character, or a better friend, if she had just asked. Whereas right now, she just kind of takes Maggie for granted.
I love friendships, like really solid friendships that ground a story. And there's this moment at the end where Maggie very cryptically is like, she's talking to Ty, because at this point Ty like and Lainey have kissed, and she calls Ty pretty face, which is hysterical, but anyway, and she says, "You're Wolverine," and they're like, "What?" And she's like, "You're Jean Grey" to Lainey, "I'm Scott, he's Wolverine." And you're like, I knew, because I'm familiar with the X-Men, what that meant. But she explains basically that like Maggie and Lainey are the true love. Like, they are the platonic soulmates of this book. You're the boy toy on the side. She can love you. I was here first, motherfucker. And that would be way better if Maggie felt like more than a reference. And again, I don't dislike Maggie as a character. She makes some decisions that are pretty good. I like that she really like talks Lainey up, but at the same time it's like, don't I look good? Like she's doing her thing, but there's not enough to her to make her feel like a fully well-rounded character. Because like their friendship doesn't feel like profound platonic soulmate.
It actually would have felt like a more solid friendship if Maggie had another life, or a life outside Lainey, but she still valued Lainey this much and still was devoted to her despite everything else going on as well.
Honestly, there was a moment where, and I thought of like me and Katie, because Katie and I are super close, very much have described each other as platonic soulmates at multiple points throughout our friendship. And there was this point where
sad violin music. Hello, darkness, my dear friend. I've come to speak with you again. I'm going to slowly zoom in while we're doing that. Go ahead.
Anyway, and there's this part where Maggie knows Lainey's upset, and she's like, "Do you want to come over and eat ice cream and watch a movie? Or do you want to come over and eat ice cream?" And Lainey's like, "No, she'd love to go, but to hang out with Maggie and to try dissect the situation over and over for 2 hours with ice cream would drive her nuts." And I'm like, why does that have to be what you guys do? Judging by who Maggie is, I can absolutely see, because like if Katie is upset about something, Katie goes one of two ways. If she's anxious, she's going to watch horror movies. And if she's just generally upset or bored, she's going to watch Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. That is her comfort movie. Literally, I have watched that movie. Like, it is a core memory at this point. How many times I've walked in on Katie watching that, or how many times we have watched that, and I have like fed Katie comfort food. It is a thing that we do, and I would have thought would have been so much better. Like, you could have had the train scene happen at a later point, but it would have been so much better for their friendship to establish this like platonic ultimate friendship thing. Again, like if you're gonna call some other motherfucker Wolverine and claim that you guys are Scott and
Jean Grey,
then yeah, you should have gone and hung out with her, watched a movie. It could have been like completely unrelated, like they watched a scary movie or like a rom-com and they ate ice cream and like something, like anything.
Video games are another thing that people do.
Something. And like that's how she coped with that moment. And then she slept over Maggie's house. That would have been great. That would have been such a friend moment. Because again, that is a high bar. That is to compare yourself to that. Your friendship does not feel Jean Grey and Scott what's-his-face-ish. And that's on the author.
It's one of the ways that the world does feel and the character feels very cardboard cutout and surface level. And so again, I think this book is it's kind of interesting because it isn't terrible in all ways, but it's fundamentally flawed. But this was another Authortube book down. So this is book 4 of Authortube, third author. We will probably just, continue down this dark hole until we find the darkest. I have a feeling it's going to loop back, and Savior's Champion was actually the first one we did is going to have been the worst.
I would say Cyborg Tinkerer is worse.
Cyborg Tinkerer was worse for you. Yeah, Savior's Champion is actually not that bad compared to Savior's Sister and Cyborg.
This is the hierarchy. This book, Savior's Champion, Savior's Sister, Cyborg Tink.
I would reverse Cyborg Tinkerer and Savior's Sister, but other than that, that's a solid.
Cyborg Tinkerer was like Savior's Champion. Savior's Sister was hard to read. It was hard to read, but for me, Cyborg Tink was way harder. Like I had to force myself to read that. It was
Yeah, let us know other Authortube books you want us to read. Tell us what you thought of the book if you've read it.
Also, if you have any books that you think you read that you think did this better, like I said, Will obviously didn't like Warriors Air. It's a weak first book, but as the series goes on, it gets significantly better. Like this one was.
Is there a book in this genre of like I'm a normal person, but then magical stuff starts happening, my power awakens? If I can cast Diana Agron as one of the characters in the book, even better. I'll definitely read it.
Perfect.
Very quickly, Maria, do we have a Patreon?
We do have a Patreon. Will, it is funny that you mentioned that. We actually have had so many people join our Patreon in the month of May. It's fantastic. We've had so many people. We do our monthly book club, and this month we had like 20 nominations for books to read. We actually are, so how it works is everybody nominates a book, we look through it, and we pick 3 that we want to read from that list. Which is very hard. There's often a lot of good nominations. We specifically, because we're going to be doing this in June, picked books that had LGBTQ representation or core main characters.
I got outvoted. It didn't end up just being girl books.
Yes, it didn't.
Maria and Katie insisted that I be.
It wasn't. I want to actually defend Will's honor. He was like, wow, that Lady and the Duke, which is about a trans character. He was like, that sounds really...
That book does sound interesting, but I do like to cast myself a little bit more.
Yeah, he likes to pretend he's just here for the bro-y girl-on-girl stuff, but he's not. It's a lie.
I like to make Maria think I'm a little more intellectual than I am.
Up there, if Will does it, he might not, is our other live streams. There's 2 up so far, Black Sun and Jurassic Park, from our Patreon live streams.
And we will talk to all of you guys later. We love you, our parasocial darlings.
Bye.